Have I got a tip for you? You might get mad at this or you might not. It depends on how you see things. Welcome to Varied Life. I'm Steve, the retired hobby tech guy living in Korea, spending out my days enjoying my early retirement because the dollar goes further overseas than it does in the United States where I was at, and I would probably still be working towards retirement and have minimal retirement years. Okay, today's topic, as you can see, is you're a bad person if you don't tip your server. And recently, in the last 2 days, I have been inundated on social media with these posts. And this is getting kind of crazy because it's kind of drumming up all this stuff before. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit. If you don't tip your server, you're a bad person. Yeah, that's kind of an American thing. Maybe the U.S. restaurants need to pay their servers more or not. I don't know. We're going to take a look. Okay, like I said, looking in social media, the search results, and I had to go over these because I didn't want to go through my feed and find them all again. But yeah, we're seeing more and more of them, like it says here. Okay, let me school some of you guys. As a server, they make $5 an hour, which they typically work anywhere 4 to 7 hours a day, $20 to $35. So their kids live and survive off of tips. So if you don't want to tip at least 18%, do the servers a favor and stay home or eat fast food. Okay, don't get me wrong, not all servers give great service, but I've never not leave a tip or leave just $5. You'd be pissed if your job only paid you half your check and they work just as hard as anyone else. If you ain't got no money, keep your broke butt home. Rant over. Isn't that kind of interesting? And it's like, yeah, tip $5. Yeah, another one here. If you can't afford to tip your server, don't go out. Here's how this all unfolded. Started off pleasant, and it goes through this person and they gave a $15 tip on $151. Other ones, all I know is I'm happy with my $5 tip these days because it can really be getting stiff or $1 or $2. Yeah, the interesting thing here is that we're seeing more and more how to tip your server, move the decimal plate over 1 multiplied by 2 or 3 or whatever it is. If you can't afford this, don't go out to eat. Yeah, this is kind of problematic because this actually started, tipping a long time ago, actually started in Europe with wealthy people kind of flaunting their wealth. So it was kind of a flex. And I highly doubt that it was actually for, helping the underprivileged. Well, that eventually came over to the United States, and the United States started doing that. And it was like, hey, you get a good tip for service and above and beyond and so on and so forth. And people were happy to do that. But the problem back then, everything was cheap back then. Everybody, you had single income families. So the husband would go work, the wife would stay and raise the kids. You'd go out to A&W Root Beer and, whatever restaurants. And then you have a good meal, great service, you pay the tip. But then again, the husband worked one job. He could buy a house, he could buy a car, he could buy groceries, he could do medical, dental, the whole 9 yards, put the kids through school, save for college and retirement, and probably pay off his house. We can't do that today. Believe me, we've tried, and it's not really a thing that you can do today with the rise in housing and all the other expenses that have gone up because of inflation. We're talking 25, 30, 40, 47% increases in certain categories of your expenses. And that's not even going to look into housing, where it has doubled and tripled in the current administration that we have. Yeah, it's gotten... Yeah, it's hard to make ends meet. When your groceries go up 30, 40%, when your utilities go up, 20, 30%, housing goes up as much as it does, you're not going to move or you're going to continue to rent. And you think, well, I'm not going to buy, so I'm still able to tip my server. No, because then your rent goes up as well. So, yeah, it's... And the whole thing is you see a bunch of these posts. And like I said, I've been inundated with these in the last 2 days. So apparently the Facebook algorithm, social media, matrix thing that's going on is causing unrest with people saying, hey, servers aren't getting paid enough. If you don't tip, you're a bad person and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know what? Way back in the day, tipping in the United States, and if you actually look it up, it is a tipping wage. So in other words, what your employer pays plus your tips has to equal the minimum wage. Well, minimum wage hasn't kept up with inflation and increases and so on and so forth. So, yeah. And then when the economy goes down, people don't tip as much. But what's interesting is the restaurants are supposed to make up the difference. And that's we're going to take a look at some of this here. The tip wage is paid to an employee in the United States who receives a substantial portion of their compensation from tips. So way back in the day, back when Reagan was there and all of that stuff was doing good, and before, we could afford to tip, and everybody was happy. Gas was low, well, except for during Carter. It got really high, and interest rates were in 14, 15%. Don't ask me how I know that. But according to the common labor provision referred to as tip credit, employees must earn at least the state's minimum wage when the tips and the wages are combined, or the employer is required to increase the wage to fulfill that threshold. Nobody ever talks about that. Nobody talks about this right here. So let me get me out of the way here so we can actually see all this. Yeah, there it is. It says the employee must earn at least the state's minimum wage when the tips and wages are combined, or the employer is required to increase the wage to fulfill that threshold. And it's, of course, it's kind of interesting. There's different states, there's different labor laws in different states, and so on and so forth. This ensures that all tipped employees earn at least a minimum wage significantly more than the tipped minimum wage. Now, what's interesting is that if this is true, now, with that being said, this is Wikipedia. So, sometimes it's questionable. But the federal law requires a wage of at least $2.13 an hour to be paid who receive at least $30 per month in tips. Uncle Sam's got to have his finger in the pie and get the taxes. If wages and tips don't equal the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour during any week, the employee is required to increase cash wages to compensate. Now, if this is true, there's a ton of people out there that I've known who were servers, had been servers, had restaurants, had servers in the United States, and nobody has ever talked about this, ever. So if this is true, and this is new to me, but it ends up that, it's actually a federal thing. So you have the minimum tipped wage by the United States and territories, and there's the breakdown. Alabama, $2.13, Alaska, $11.73, because everything's expensive in Alaska. Colorado's $11.40. Yeah, we left Colorado because it was getting crazy. Tipped wage plus tips must reach $14.42 an hour. Otherwise, the restaurant should be paying them. I know people that worked off of tips that weren't making nothing. And we see a ton of posts on social media talking about, I worked, X amount of hours. I'm a server and did this, so many hours on my feet. I'm getting bunions and blah, 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 blah. I've got I'm a single mom, 3 kids, whatever. I have a house payment or rent payment, and utilities keep going up. And I only made, $50 in tips this week, or I only got $8. If this is true, your employer should be paying you that difference so that you do get the tipped wage and that amount you see what I'm saying? Nobody's ever said that. I have never, ever heard this. And when I've researched this more and more, Hawaii is $12.75. We lived there for a year, couldn't afford it. And that's why we retired overseas. But you see all of these prices, it's absolutely crazy. So yeah, the wage, $2.13 plus tips, gotta make that, that federal amount. Wow. But nobody ever talks about this. Now, it's interesting because you talk about, like I said, if you end up working in a restaurant and you're a server and you're not making enough money because of the tips, because the economy's down, people are tightening their belts and they're not spending as much money because the expenses are going up everywhere else and their paychecks are not increasing as inflation does, And actually, what we end up seeing is businesses cutting back on employees. And so that's why we see more kiosks in restaurants and robot servers and things like that, because it's easier to buy a robot server that will bring the food from the kitchen to your table, pay $10, $20, $30,000, whatever it is, and that's a one-time price, and boom, you've got a server that doesn't complain, doesn't show up late, and aside from mechanical errors, yeah, your robot's going to do a lot more work, will never be late, and you don't have to tip them. That's a big thing here in Korea. There's actually robot servers here in Korea. Now, the other interesting thing, talking about this here is that maybe restaurants need to pay their servers more. Tipping, if you're not tipping, you're a bad person. Here in Korea, tipping is not a thing. It is not a thing. When you go on the regular economy, away from the military bases, because right off post they'll ask for tips and stuff like that, but there's some Korean rules and laws that, I don't know, I think it's a little sketchy on what they're doing when they're asking for tips. But yeah, they pay their servers. And these people they're also able to get national health care through the Korean National Health Insurance. They can get all that as part of their employment and so on and so forth. So it's not like, in the United States where things are very different, where I think restaurants and a lot of unscrupulous restaurant people have been working people for tips and they don't pay above and beyond. It's just, well, you work for tips and well, you got $8 this month. I didn't have to put anything into the kitty. And we've seen pictures of the checks of people working for a week and getting $8, $10, $12, for a paycheck for a full week's worth of work. And it's just like, wow. But in Korea, it's not a thing. And in many other countries, tipping is not a thing. Matter of fact, here in Korea, tipping is considered an insult. And especially if you tip somebody who's older, it's creating a hierarchy and saying, I'm better than you, so I'm giving you money because you're poor. So there's that aspect of it. So here in Korea, the price of whatever it is you're eating is what you're eating, and that's what you pay. And the other great thing about Korea is that now, with the advent of kiosks and everything kind of like that, kind of like if you go to like an Applebee's or what's the other one? Texas Roadhouse, you might see a little kiosk on your table as you sit down in the booth, and then you can go through the menu, you can order and do all that stuff right there. You don't have to look at a person, which is great. I'm not really a people person. But yeah, that's it. A lot of stuff here in Korea is done by kiosks. Now, they'll still have servers, but the server usually doesn't come up and take your order. They still have places like that. There's a lot of places like that. But more and more places are doing the little kiosks. There's a number of places where I live that Korean restaurants, and it's like, yeah, you just pull it open, choose English, boom, or Korean, whatever it is. You pick your menu, drinks, sides, boom, and order it, stick in your card, and you're done. Food comes, hot piping food, wonderfulness, and it's so good. Korean beef ribs. We won't even get into that. But you'll still have some servers, but the restaurant pays for their wages. So I think what has happened in the United States is we have gotten so used to paying servers such a low amount, but it hasn't kept up with the cost of living, and it hasn't kept up with the cost of expenses and so on and so forth over time. It's kind of like Social Security. When the cost of living goes up, say it goes up 10%, the cost of living increase that you'll get from Social Security is like 1.5%, maybe 2%, maybe 2.5%. It will never keep pace with the increases that we see. So people on Social Security, and that's their only income. Yeah, you're wondering why they're rationing their toilet paper. It's kind of a thing. So I really get tired of people, and especially living here in Korea, close to a U.S. military base. The thing that really gets up my nose are the people that come here, the military spouses and so on and so forth, who have not lived in Korea. They're stationed in Korea, and they have restaurants, and the restaurant's all on post. Little thing pops up, you want a tip, blah, they all have that on their little things. But I always say no. it is what it is. But off-post is a totally different thing. And what I've seen are social justice warriors who jump on the bandwagon, their soapbox, and say, "No, we need to start tipping the Koreans, and we need to start tipping because that's the honorable thing to do. You're a bad person if you don't tip these servers." And it's like, yeah, you really have no clue about Korean law and what is required. And yeah, they do get national. There was a post last year that I saw that ends up this dependent of a military service member got on and went on this rant on how we need to start tipping and bringing tipping culture into Korea. And it's like they don't get paid enough and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, yeah, actually they do. And she made claims that, they can't get health insurance. No, actually they can through their employer. They can qualify because it's based on your income. So everybody can get the Korean national health insurance. So, and she's like, well, they don't, blah, blah, blah. And it's like all of these things I disproved by, posting a bunch of stuff from, I don't know, the Korean government and the law and things like that. And I actually have some family members on the wife's side who owned restaurants or currently own restaurants. And they're like, yeah, that's not how, what she says, that's not how that works. So whoever she's talking to most likely could be immigrants in Korea that are working as servers that are not getting paid what they're supposed to be paid. And there's that whole, they're not here on a work visa, so they're illegal, but they're working as servers and so on and so forth. So the problem that you'll see is not that the restaurants are not paying them, it's that they're engaged in, I don't know, illegal employment, to put it nicely. But that is the exception and not the rule. Here in Korea, the majority of restaurants right outside my window, outside this apartment complex, they pay their servers. There's restaurants that we go to that pay their servers. They don't ask for tips, and they have people that are on work visas to be their servers, and everything works out fine. Now, there are a couple of places, and they're not places that I would go eat personally. I've got a little bit higher standards, but yeah, for the majority, you don't tip here in Korea. It's not a thing because they actually pay their people. And it's absolutely crazy because it's like, they'll run with something that they heard somebody else say from some other spouse and some other dependent who heard somebody from a server that was at a bar that was probably most likely here not on a work visa. In other words, they're an illegal worker. And so the people who are paying them aren't paying them what they're required by law because it's all under the table so that they can keep more of the profit from the GIs that frequent the bars and the, yeah, that's probably where all that started, okay? And when you start breaking this stuff Barney basic to these people, these social justice warriors that are like, well, we got to tip, we have to tip in America, servers get such low pay. Maybe the restaurants, instead of forcing people to tip, maybe you should get a better tactic. Go to the restaurants and say, you need to pay your people more. You need to pay your people the tipped wage plus their tips that equal that amount that we looked at and actually follow the law. Because I know for a fact when I was in the United States, I knew a bunch of people that worked as servers, past, present, future. Well, not future, I don't have my time machine finished yet, but you get the idea is that these people, servers are getting stiffed in the United States by restaurants. Not all of them, I will concede that, and so should other people, but maybe we just need to revamp how the United States does stuff. Since expenses and everything goes up, but the wages that we get. But then the other part of the other side of the coin is that if we have to pay servers more, then the cost of goods and services that's going to be another added expense, along with the goods and services that we see with inflation and increase in prices, so that $10, $12 burgers suddenly going to become $14, $15 burgers, $16 burger, and so on and so forth. That's a possibility. But then there's a number of times where I remember restaurants where you'd have 10, 15, 20 servers in a night at a restaurant. Do you really need all those servers? No, you could probably downsize, and especially when we saw the increases with the say like the minimum wage in certain places like Seattle, California, and so on and so forth. We had restaurants that had a huge amount of servers, and when that law came into effect to bump it up to $12, $15, $21 an hour, whatever it was, all of a sudden they shrunk down and they let a bunch of people go because they realized I don't need 20 people to serve the people in my restaurant. I need 10 or 8 or whatever it is. So in other words, when they're hit with these huge overheads, they're actually look and they say, okay, well, can we do the same job with how many employees is it going to take? We're not in this world of opulence and prosperity that we once were, where the dollar went far, 50s, 60s, 70s, well, maybe not the 70s because of the whole Carter and the embargo thing and gas, interest rates, crazy. But maybe during the Reagan years or things like that, where, we could afford to do that. But the thing is now we can't afford to do that because of the incredible increases in expenses. So, yeah, I just love it when people from the United States come here to Korea and start bumping their gums and talking about things that they have no clue about because they heard from somebody or somebody's uncle or aunt who was stationed here who went to a bar that talked to an illegal worker who said they weren't getting paid much at all. And now they think that everybody in Korea gets that low pay, and they don't. Okay, it's goods and services comes up here. We have inflation in Korea, but the dollar goes further here than it does in the United States. That's a hell of a fact. And that's why we were able to retire early over here than me being in the United States and still working until I was almost 70 and then retiring and maybe spending, 10 years? Yeah, I retired at 54. And that was due to my money would go farther in a foreign country. Everything's cheaper, at least where I live. Don't go to Seoul and try to think you're going to live cheap. But there are places around the world where you can retire and your dollar goes further and you can retire early. I'm living proof of that. And there's thousands and thousands of other retirees who live overseas and their dollar goes further. But a lot of these places, you're not required to tip, and it's seen as, like I said, it's seen as an insult. So when you tip somebody, so it's not a thing here in Korea. It's not the norm. Maybe it is close to the military bases, which I've seen, but then again, those places I don't really frequent that much. And even if they do ask for a tip, I don't tip because I know the Korean laws, I know the restaurants and what they're supposed to pay, and so on and so forth. So yeah, just get off the high horse in your soapbox of saying everybody needs to tip and tip and tip. Well, maybe that should change because a long time ago we had the money and the prosperity to do that. Now, not so much. And again, I could ramble on and talk about Social Security and cost of living increases, and that if the minimum wage increase has increased, then why hasn't the minimum wage for Social Security recipients, especially those with low amounts, how come they don't get the minimum wage to live? And they always politicians always threaten Social Security. I'm ranting and going down a rabbit trail in case you haven't noticed. But the politicians always say, Social Security, our seniors are going to be at risk. And, if you don't vote for me, they're going to be destitute. But they're funded until like 2035. But yet they'll say, next year, if you don't vote for me, they're going to die. It's that fear-mongering thing. It's the same type of thing. Let's actually revamp the system to where things actually work. So anyway, yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. Other people that we end up seeing as we look at some of these things here, tip your server. An $8 tip is not okay on a $120 bill. What if, that's all you can afford? Let's not forget servers live off tips. No, actually, they don't live off tips. They live off of tips plus the tipping wage that their employees are supposed to pay that will equal the minimum wage. Working hard during the holiday season, tip your servers, blah, 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 everybody. I'm not against tipping. Matter of fact, here in Korea, I just said that we don't tip. But it's not. Yeah, there's another one. Seems like a lot of people cut and paste this stuff. Yep, there's another cut and paste. So again, a lot of these come out, and it's just like, blah 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 blah. Tip your server, blah 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 blah. All of this pops up. But the interesting thing is that while there is no tipping in Korea, generally, like for example, we got a new washer and dryer. So we paid for a new washer and dryer, and electronics are expensive here in Korea. But we got a new washer and dryer. Two guys came and installed it, took out the old ones, put in the new ones. They're so nice. Oh, the clothes come out great. Huge difference between the like 8 and 10-year-old appliances we had. But even though we don't tip here in Korea, when people deliver stuff, we'll have cans of coffee, we'll have water, we'll have snacks, and kind of like, when somebody moves in, you bring pizza and beer. Well, in Korea, you don't do the pizza. Well, you do pizza and beer, but not for delivery people. But you'll have little snacks, and you'll have, hot cans of coffee and, convenience store items and things like that, to make their day go a little bit better. Just to show the appreciation, because that means so much more than handing over a $20 bill. There's this. It's not as personable. And if you've been in Korea or lived overseas for quite some time, and I'm working on total number of years in Korea is 12, 13, 14, just over 14 years, 2 years in this last stint, and going. Keep tallying up the numbers, but it's more appreciative. People are more appreciative when you go out and you buy snacks, you buy drinks or sodas or whatever, and bring those to the delivery people or the people that come and work in your house and so on and so forth. You get them little snacks and hot food or whatever. But tipping, no, that's not a thing. Now, if somebody saved my life, oh yeah, or saved my wife from death or serious injury or whatever, beat somebody up that was trying to take my money and they stepped in and stopped the assailant, then yes, I would do everything I could. I mean, of course, they probably wouldn't accept the money. But then again, in Korea, it's very different. When you give somebody a gift that's in an envelope, which indicates that it's most likely money, but usually this is gifts between family members or, things like that, you don't open the envelope in front of the person, because if it's too much, you don't want the person who gave you a little and couldn't afford that much to lose face. And vice versa. If you gave a little bit of money and they open it up and there's only a few dollars in there, then everybody knows that, yeah. And what happens is just you couldn't afford it and you could only put in a few dollars. It was all about saving face. So they'll take the gift and they'll accept it, and then they'll open it up in the privacy of their home. But when a delivery person comes and delivers stuff, and I've got stuff that gets delivered that's heavy, the delivery man, will give them snacks and a Coke or a soda or whatever it is, and he really appreciates that. And as I think, we did in the United States as well. So, yeah, very different worlds of what we see here in Korea versus other countries. And again, tipping started overseas in Europe, and then it came to the United States. And I think it was like the mid 1800s or early 1900s, and it became a thing. Thing. Look how tip money for everybody. It was seen as a flex, and it kind of continued on. And then during the the 30s, 40s, especially the 50s and 60s, and maybe even into the 70s, is that tipping was for good service, above and beyond service, you tipped. But then after that, about the 80s, we started to see a decline in the United States, and especially into the 90s. And when you got into the 2000s, it really kind of nosedived, where you had people that were servers that didn't really give a damn. Here's your food, there, eat, It ended up being a thing, and so you had poor service, but then you had people still expecting tips. And now we've got to a place in the United States where you got to tip on everything, and it's all, COVID, we should tip everybody because of COVID. And, well, isn't it funny how our government will spend hundreds of millions $500 million to overseas countries and give them money. And when we go through COVID or go through a national disaster ourselves, our government gives you what, $700? In Louisiana, the big storm went through and wiped everybody out, or the most recent one that we saw in Hawaii, the whole city burned down, and what did people get? Here's $500, from our government. That's it, or $700. It was something like that, and it's like, but then the American taxpayers, the politicians are sending millions and hundreds of millions of dollars overseas to people that hate us and paying them when they go through a national disaster, $5, $10, $15, $20,000. But that's okay. But we're not going to take care of our own people. Yeah, I'm really ranting now because that kind of got up my nose. Yeah, and it's just absolutely crazy. So, we went through this whole thing of tipping and how people are saying, oh, $5 on a 100 bill, $100 meal isn't a tip. And consumers are talking about they're pulling back on tipping services on drivers and hairstylists and so on and so forth, that food delivery people, restaurant servers and food delivery people have each fallen 8 percentage points since 2021, according to a new survey. So yeah, tipping is not, people are trying to make ends meet. And so yeah, they're going to forego tipping. But remember, what we looked at is that the restaurant, if the tips are low, the restaurant needs to step up and pay that difference so the server gets that minimum wage. The tipping wage plus their tips have to equal that minimum wage. And again, that goes back to the list that we saw. So when you see all these people saying, oh, tipping is, yeah, you got to tip your servers and blah, blah, blah. You're a bad person if you don't. It just seems like $10, it's not cute like it used to be. It's not 2000s, and Uber drivers and complaining about not getting tips. And we've seen the videos of servers, delivery drivers, Uber drivers, food delivery, DoorDash, and whatever. They deliver the food, and the delivery person leaves it at the door, and they'll throw the food or whatever, and the person comes out, it's like, hey, what's going on? And it's like or they spit in the food or whatever, or don't deliver the food. And it's like, hey, the person's there. It's like, hey, I don't have any money in the bank, so I was going to tip you cash. And then seen the video? Yeah, the one where the lady who was delivering the food, and she left a nasty note in the bag, and now she's caught red-handed because it's like, oh, damn, she was going to give me cash, and she didn't have money in the bank because she's struggling too, and I just left a very nasty note in her meal. Yeah, and it's all caught on Ring camera. So, that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's very problematic. And, there's no clear answer. We need to get our economy under control. We need to get more jobs. We need to get more prosperous in the United States. And, I think tipping was good way back when, but I think we need to get away from that. Honestly, this is just my 2 cents. And where restaurants need to step up their game a little bit, and the owners. And I know I'm going to get the other side of the coin, the devil's advocate. Well, restaurants are barely making enough to make it, to just pay their employees and stay open and break even. I get that. Again, there's people that I knew in the United States that had restaurants that would tell me about how, it's rough for the small mom and pop restaurants. I get it, but if we keep doing the same thing that we're doing, people are going to cut back on the things that they can. They can't cut back on rent. They can't cut back on food. Well, I mean, you can to some degree. There's a lot of people that are going to food drives and whatever, so there's that. But eventually, with electricity and gas and water and sewer and trash and all of these things, electricity and, of course, then you got to have internet and you have this and that. All of, the gas, the title, the registration, insurance, all of these things keep going up. And people are like, my paycheck isn't reflected in those increases. So I have to come back. I have to cut back somehow. So it's either I do without electricity or I pay the server the tip. What do you think they're going to do? Or I'm going to pay the server their tip, their big 20, 30% tip, but I'm not going to be able to buy all the food I need for my wife and my kids and so on and so forth. Who do you think's going to win that war? And by calling somebody a bad person because they can't tip what you think, tell me, oh great and wondrous wise one, who knows all, if you have the choice between keeping electricity and heat on in your home and tipping a server, which one are you going to do for you and your family? It's a pretty simple choice. And if I was a bad person, I would say, yeah, here, little, what is the, I can't remember the name of the restaurant, Hooters. Never been. But the Hooters, oh, here, Hooters server, have $100 tip, but I'm not going to, just let the water get turned off, sweetie. That's no big deal. Who is the good person in that situation? Yeah. Ask the wife and the kids, and they'll probably tell you. So again, this comes down to the situation and the things that are going on, and to make such a blanket statement. And that's what I see is very problematic on social media. Is people will make absolute statements without considering the situation and all the different variables. And they'll say, well, if you don't tip, you're a bad person. What about the person who got injured on the job and they're on unemployment and they're not making as much money, but yet they still want to take their kids out to a restaurant, to congratulate their kid who graduated high school or middle school, or some type of, maybe it's their birthday and they cinch the belts up really tight and they're paying and they can pay the bill, but they can't pay the tip. Or the other side of the coin is like, well, Johnny, here's the Wonder Bread with the hot dog. Enjoy your birthday meal. Yeah. When reality sets in, that's what people don't understand. And when you make these blanket statements and you make these absolute stands on morality of saying that if you don't do this, you're bad, or if you do this, you're bad, they often don't look at the different variables or the totality of circumstances. And a lot of these people that I've seen haven't been poor. I've been on food stamp, and it sucks. I've worked 2 and 3 jobs while I was in the military because I wasn't getting paid enough. I worked in the military, and I qualified for food stamps. That made me feel like dirt. So when we went to restaurants, and that was a long time ago, but even when we went to restaurants, I couldn't afford to tip, but I still wanted my wife and my daughter to be able to have a good time, and I would suck it up and I would make it out on some other job or gig that I was doing. You can call me a bad person all you want. I don't give a damn because you're not paying my bills. And until you pay my bills and until you are in the situation that I am facing and you have to make those decisions, I don't care what you tell me how much I need to tip. That's not going to do it. It's just not going to work. Now, have I tipped in the past? Absolutely. I have had some great servers. I have had people that went out of their way to be an exemplary service, and their service and bringing the food and tending hand and foot on me and my family and making us feel special. And of course, I have obviously tipped those people more than what was required. But the whole thing was, at that time of my life, I was able to tip, and so I did. And so I was able to bless somebody because of the blessings that we had received through hard work. And, we got the luck of the draw, as some might say. And so I would pass that on to the servers. It's not like I'm an anti-tipping person altogether. But again, I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been poor and I've been well off. But you can't make an absolute statement to say people are bad that if you don't tip your server, because that's absolutely asinine. So there it is. That's it. I'm done with my rant. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. But again, these people that tell me that I should tip, especially when I was back in those circumstances, where I didn't have a lot of money and all I could was afford the meal. I think I've made up for it during the times when I was prosperous. And again, it kind of karma, it evened out. Okay. And probably, it's kind of like going to church, the church thing, and they say, oh, well, you need to, I never tithe, and it's like, I remember I had a pastor that was like, oh, well, we got a problem with you, and because you don't support the church. Now I'm ranting and raving because money, church, it all ties it. And the pastor's like, well, you just don't really seem to support the church and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really? Really, really? Tell me, oh, great pastor, oh, learned one of the scriptures. How am I not supporting the church? Well, you see, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, I've led Bible studies, attend men's meetings, I've donated food, and everything that you've asked for donations for, I have given. And it's like, so what? I've given time, I've done volunteer service through the events that the church has done. So tell me, oh, enlightened one, how am I not supporting the church? And of course they bat, but I want the answer. And eventually he says, well, it comes to the point, where you're not really supporting the church because, we want somebody who's more consistent with their giving, and somebody who actually, follows scripture. And it's like, oh, really? Follow scripture? Interesting. So you're saying that financially you're keeping track, and you're saying that I'm not paying my fair share of the tithes. What tithes are we talking about? Are we talking about the Levitical tithes? Are we talking about the tithes for the orphans and the widows? Are we talking about, the other? Because there's like 3 different tithes in the Bible that we see. So, which one is it? But wait a second. You said that in the church, we don't follow the Old Testament, and that's where the tithes start. So what are we doing here? Which one? And so anyway, long story short, it ends up that the pastor ended up saying, well, you don't give enough. And it says, you know what? Because I followed the Bible and it says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I don't write checks. I give money without my name on it. And I give more than the tithe. So again, it's kind of crazy when we see stuff like that. But what do you think about tithes? Servers, tips, the whole 9 yards, different cultures and the way that they do it. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. So with that said, we left that church, obviously, and it's time for me to leave because I got to get some lunch. And so we will see you on the next video, but your job, put something in the comment section down below. We'll see you. Peace. Yeah.